My family and I used to eat a lot of cheese, all types of cheese, from mozzarella on our pizzas, to Parmesan on our salads, to ricotta in our lasagna. Very few fast food restaurants do not have lots of added cheese on the menu. Sometimes we would eat a piece of brie or a cheese stick for the protein and sense of fullness. After we switched to a whole foods plant-based lifestyle, we went to an Italian restaurant thinking that we would be fine with a salad, pasta, and marinara sauce. Wouldn't you know it, we had to scrape off a big glob of mozzarella cheese just to get to the good stuff in our salads. Have you ever stopped to look at your cheese and wonder where that mozzarella cheese or slice of cheddar cheese came from? What's in that cheese? And what will it do to you when you eat it? In this video, we're going to take a look at what's in our cheese. When I ordered cheese on my pizza, the image in my head of the dairy cow that produced the milk for the cheese was of Buttercup. She was on a lush farm with lots of green grass, alfalfa, rye to wander around in, peacefully munching on that grass with her babies right next to her for 20 years. I was not thinking about Buttercup as part of a large business. The Penn State Extension reports that from 2006 to 2016, the number of dairy farms decreased by 40% and herd size increased by 60%. In the late 50s, dairy farmers began moving toward large, concentrated confinement systems. This allowed for greater efficiencies in controlling larger herds and controlling their diet. Consistency is needed when making processed food. In large operations, 1,000 cows may be milked 3 times a day, which could mean that cows have to be milked over 20 hours per day. That's a lot of logistics, organization, financial management, and people. And it's a biological system that requires herd health, reproduction, calf care, nutrition, and waste management. Waste management? The EPA estimates 82 pounds per day of wet manure per 1,000-pound cow. In other words, an operation with 1,000 cows produces 82,000 pounds of manure a day. What to do with all that manure? The EPA does not recommend just letting the manure flow away naturally, as in this picture from their 2004 risk assessment evaluation for concentrated animal feeding operations. In the article, How Much Pus Is There in Milk?, Dr. Michael Greger talks about dairy cows that endure annual cycles of artificial insemination, pregnancy and birth, and mechanized milking for 10 out of 12 months, including 7 months of their 9-month pregnancies. He continues, this excessive metabolic drain overburdens the cows who are considered productive for only 2 years and are slaughtered for hamburger when their profitability drops typically around their 4th birthday, a small fraction of their natural lifespan. In terms of productivity, the USDA Economic Research Service reports that from 2000 to 2020, milk output per cow increased at an annual rate of 1.53% nationally, with significant variations across states. Over 20 years, that's over a 30% increase. Pretty impressive, but we have to realize that there is a cost. Cows are beings of nature, the same as us. Think about how a human mom would be able to handle the physical toll of increasing her breast milk output by 30%. So what's in our cheese? Larger operations where cows are the business, and economics requires treating the cows as milk machines. As you can imagine, keeping large numbers of any animals healthy while confined to a smaller area takes a lot of work. Mastitis is an infection of the mammary glands that causes painful swelling or hardening of the udders. Pamela Rugg writes in the article, Responsible Use of Antibiotics for the Treatment of Clinical Mastitis. Mastitis is the most common disease of dairy cows and the most common reason that cows are treated with antibiotics. Some of those antibiotics and pathogens that are not killed by the antibiotics end up in our milk. What's in our cheese? A trace amount of antibiotics. In the article, How Much Pus Is There in Milk?, Dr. Greger explains that when a cow is infected with mastitis, there are about 1 million cells of inflammatory immune cells that form pus per spoonful of milk. While it sounds like a lot, Dr. Greger calculates that there is only a single drop of pus in the average cup of milk in the US. What's in our cheese? A drop of pus. We can also add naturally occurring hormones. This table shows the main hormones and their concentrations found in cow's milk, such as estrogens and progesterone, pituitary hormones such as prolactin, and the insulin-like growth factors, IGF. Like estrogen and progesterone, our human bodies produce the insulin-like growth factor hormones that we need. Dr. T. Colin Campbell writes that our bodies make more IGF-1 when we consume animal-based foods like meat and dairy. This translates to a 5.1 times increased risk of advanced stage prostate cancer for people with higher than normal blood levels of IGF-1. According to the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, higher blood levels of IGF-1 have been linked to increased risk for premenopausal breast cancer. What's in our cheese? Add a greater risk of cancer to the list. You may have noticed the natural growth hormone BST in the table. It is responsible for skeletal, organ, and cell growth in humans and animals. There is a genetically engineered version of BST called recombinant somatotropin, RBST, also called bovine growth hormone, that can be injected into dairy cows to increase milk production. According to Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, milk from RBST-treated cows is used in dairy products including ice cream, butter, cheese, and yogurt. The United States does not require companies to label the use of RBST in their products, although it was banned in the European Union in 1990 and never approved for sale in Canada due to animal health concerns. In the US, some dairy products will have a label, such as this label on Walmart's Great Value Milk, stating that their farmers have pledged to not treat any of their cows with any artificial growth hormones. What's in your cheese? If your cheese doesn't have a label, add genetically engineered growth hormone promoter. Understanding production requirements, small profit margins, and dealing with complex biological and environmental systems, it's easy to see the stresses on dairy farms. As a consumer, it is much harder for me to be okay with being the reason for the stress of forced milk production, poor living conditions, and environmental hazards on Buttercup. She is not contentedly grazing in the pasture with her baby. Dr. Barnard talks about how we humans can be cruel to the very dairy cows that we expect so much out of. In the PCRM video, 5 Frightful Facts About Cheese, he describes the short life of a dairy cow from birth to slaughter at minute 15. Take a listen. If all the health arguments against cheese can't convince you to stop or drastically slow down your intake, those 2 minutes might. In the 2012 New York Times editorial, Got Milk, You Don't Need It, Mark Bittman wrote, "There are over 9 million dairy cows, most of whom live tortured, miserable lives while making a significant contribution to greenhouse gases. What's in our cheese? Cruelty to the dairy cows and harm to our planet. Perhaps it doesn't have to be that way." In the 10 Principles for a Whole Foods Plant-Based Lifestyle video, I talked about principle number 9, take responsibility. We can take responsibility for our own health, and we can take responsibility as cheese consumers. Tesco is the UK's biggest supermarket chain. If you're looking for a better way, here are a few highlights from Tesco's approach to animal welfare in the UK. Tethering and tail docking are not permitted on farms that supply us. We have clear welfare measures for cow body condition, antibiotic usage, calving success, record keeping, etc. We set targets for improvement each year and monitor important areas such as lameness, cow health, and cleanliness on each farm. We prohibit the routine use of antibiotics to prevent disease. Our British hard cheese is produced from milk that comes from farmers in our Tesco cheese group, who receive a premium over the market to work with Tesco on the health and welfare of their herds. When I've talked about processed food, you probably weren't really thinking about cheese. As it turns out, grass and grains that the dairy cow eats to produce her breast milk goes through a lot of processing to become cheese. In the 5 Frightful Facts About Cheese video, Dr. Barnard talks about the stinky bacteria added to the milk to start the fermentation process. For cheeses like Limburger and Munster, the bacteria used is the same as the bacteria found on a stinky, unwashed foot. Then, rennet is added. The enzymes in rennet coagulate the milk and help separate the solid curds from the liquid whey, giving cheesemakers the raw material to make the many varieties of cheese. Rennet was traditionally taken from the forced stomach of a slaughtered, unweaned calf. Today, 80 to 90% of cheeses are estimated to be made with a genetically modified rennet, where a calf gene is inserted into E. coli. What's in your cheese? Most likely, genetically modified organisms. A lot of salt is used in cheese making. Salt is a natural preservative, helps to prepare cheese for aging, adds to the flavor of the cheese, helps to dry the curds during draining by controlling moisture and causing the curds to shrink, helps to develop a good rind, and helps to kill bacteria and other harmful growth when used as a brine. All of these steps require salt. What's in our cheese? A whole lot of sodium. Lauren Panoff writes about casein and casomorphins in the Healthline article, Is Cheese Addictive? In the Accumulating Knowledge for a Whole Foods Plant-Based Lifestyle video, I talked about casein, the majority of protein in dairy milk. Lauren writes that it takes about 10 pounds, 4.5 kilograms, of milk to make 1 pound or half a kilogram of cheese. So the concentration of casein is even higher in cheese than milk. When your body digests casein, the casein is broken down into smaller compounds called casomorphins. The casomorphins can cross the blood-brain barrier and attach to dopamine receptors in your brain. Your brain then releases dopamine, which gives you feelings of pleasure and reward, like any other opiate. If you thought it was hard to give up cheese, there is a reason. Dr. Neil Barnard writes in his book, The Cheese Trap, these opiates attach to the same brain receptors that heroin and morphine attach to. They are not strong enough to get you arrested, but they are just strong enough to keep you coming back for more. In the book The China Study, Dr. T. Colin Campbell writes, what protein consistently and strongly promoted cancer? Casein, which makes up 87% of cow's milk protein, promoted all stages of the cancer process. Dr. Campbell was talking about experimental animal studies, but went on to direct a comprehensive biomedical research study of diet, lifestyle, and disease to verify these findings. What's in our cheese? A mild opiate and cancer promotion. If you're like my family, we denied that we were eating that much cheese. However much we may have been lying to ourselves, the USDA's cheese consumption numbers don't lie. Well, I hope they are not underreporting. How much cheese are Americans eating per person each year? In 1970, we were eating about 11 pounds of cheese per year. By 1990, we were averaging over 24.5 pounds of cheese per person per year. In 2010, we ate almost 33 pounds of cheese. In 2021, 39.4 pounds a year. It's been a steady climb, and our bodies are the proof. Have you ever checked the ingredients label of your cheese? Yes, there are wonderful nutrients like protein, calcium, and vitamin A. Unfortunately, they come at a very steep price. On average, Americans eat 11.41 pounds of cheddar cheese a year. This table is from USDA's Food Data Central Database. With those great nutrients, we also get over 21,000 calories, 1,800 grams of fat, and almost 35,000 milligrams of sodium each year. What about the rest of the 28 pounds of cheese we're eating? It's too scary to even calculate. Let's make this even more real. You're eating part skim mozzarella cheese on your pizza, not full-fat cheddar cheese. It's not that bad, right? Here's the table from USDA's Food Data Central Database on part skim mozzarella cheese. Did you realize this is the data for a quarter cup of cheese? Stop this video right now and go to your kitchen. Pull out your measuring cup. A quarter cup is tiny. My family and I were eating more than a quarter cup of cheese at a time. Let's be conservative and say a cup of cheese per person at a meal on a couple slices of pizza. We'll conveniently ignore the cheese on the salad. That makes 360 calories, 12 grams of saturated fat, about 80 milligrams of cholesterol, and 760 milligrams of sodium from the part skim mozzarella cheese. What does a high-fat diet do to you? What does it even matter if you're eating a lot of saturated fat? Dr. Barnard puts it this way. It's worth noting that milk and other dairy products are our biggest source of saturated fat, and there are very credible links between dairy consumption and both type 1 diabetes and the most dangerous form of prostate cancer. In this study, the researchers write, these results demonstrate that a single high-fat meal transiently impairs endothelial function. I talked about the dangers of damaging your endothelial function and its role in heart disease in Accumulating Knowledge for a Whole Foods Plant-Based Lifestyle video. In this study, the participants ate either a high-fat or low-fat meal. The high-fat meal increased airway inflammation, but also impaired the ability of the medicine that relaxes and opens the airways in the lungs to work. During our Pescatarian Plus diet, my family and I continued to drink milk and eat cheese. We thought that dairy provided a good source of protein and calcium. Dairy does provide this, but it brings a lot of unwanted consequences with it. We couldn't lose weight, and we couldn't bring down our cholesterol levels, even though we regularly exercised. What's in our cheese? Protein, calcium, vitamin A, and way too much saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium. So throw in an increased risk for cardiovascular disease, cancer, and airway inflammation. One part of our body that my family and I did not think would ever be affected by eating cheese is the brain, specifically the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is deep inside your brain. It reacts to chemical messages from nerve cells in your brain and body to keep your body stable. Cleveland Clinic calls your hypothalamus your body's smart control because it regulates body temperature, blood pressure, hunger and thirst, sense of fullness when eating, mood, sex drive, and sleep. Our fat cells produce a hormone called leptin. One of the functions of leptin is to tell our brains that we have enough fat stored and we're no longer starving. Dr. Michael Greger writes in How Not to Diet, "Feed lab animals saturated fat. The fat crosses the blood-brain barrier and accumulates in the hypothalamus within hours, causing inflammation, leptin resistance, and overeating, just like a light switch." But that's lab animals you're thinking. To see if the same mechanism happens in human brains, high-resolution MRI brain scans were conducted for normal weight people and obese people. The image on the left, image A, is an MRI of a human with normal weight, while image B is an obese human. The thick arrows are in the medial basal hypothalamus and the thin arrows are in the amygdala. We're looking for the signal intensity between the medial basal hypothalamus and amygdala. The brightness difference in the obese person between the thick arrow and the thin arrow. The graph shows the changes in the intensity ratios of brain injury as BMI increases. As you can see on the chart, injury to the hypothalamus was significantly higher among obese subjects. If you remember, in the How to Lose Weight with Plants video, obesity means a BMI over 30. Whether in lab animals or in us, the same mechanism for harming the hypothalamus happens on a high-fat diet. The researchers also note that unlike inflammation in peripheral tissues, a process that develops over weeks to months of high-fat diet feeding in rodent models, markers of hypothalamic inflammation are elevated within 24 hours of high-fat diet exposure. In other words, within 24 hours of eating a high-fat diet, the diet was causing inflammation in the brains of the lab animals. What's in our cheese? Hypothalamic inflammation, leptin resistance, and overeating. In randomized crossover trials where the subjects did not know how much saturated fat they were eating, Dr. Greger writes that by covertly increasing saturated fat intake, you can reversibly induce negative changes in brain function, mood, inflammation, and resting metabolic rate, and even apparently undercut motivation to exercise. According to the study authors, physical activity was 12 to 15% higher for the group on the monounsaturated fat diet compared to the group on a saturated fat diet. Interesting too that the anger hostility score was significantly higher for the saturated fat diet group. What's in our cheese? Less of a motivation to exercise and more anger hostility. But why stop there? Let's go next door to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a brain area critical for learning and memory. Damage to the hippocampus can result in difficulties in learning, performance speed, recall accuracy, and/or problem solving. In this study, the Australian researchers write, an extensive body of animal data now suggests that a Western-style diet characterized by high intakes of saturated fats and added sugars, an HFS diet, causes rapid impairment to hippocampal dependent learning and memory. They go on to say that there are many observations of a high saturated fat and sugar diet in humans showing poorer hippocampal dependent learning and memory. The researchers wanted to test whether high saturated fat and sugar diets cause similar impairments in hippocampal dependent learning and memory in healthy, lean, young people. Turns out, one bad meal a day for 4 days can impair our brain function. The researchers randomized men and women to eat either a breakfast, double in saturated fat and added sugars, or a healthier breakfast, but with the same amount of sugars, for 4 consecutive days. A significant loss in hippocampus dependent learning and memory resulted in the high-fat diet subjects to recall 75% compared with 90% of the control or low-fat group. On top of that, the double-fat breakfast group had to eat more food, about 70 calories worth, to feel the same sensation of fullness as the control group. Their sensitivity to hunger had been impaired after only one high-fat meal in a day. What's in our cheese? A harder time learning and knowing when you're full. 7410 style is a whole foods plant-based lifestyle. I hope you took away that cheese is not a whole food, even in an animal-based diet. To achieve this healthful lifestyle, a 10 physically and mentally takes our efforts 7 days a week. In other words, we live this lifestyle 7 days a week, practicing the 10 principles to achieve a Forever 10. Check out the 10 principles for a whole food plant-based lifestyle video. Clearly, there are a lot of benefits to giving up cheese, but understanding everything that's going on with your body and brain, you may not be able to completely stop eating cheese at this moment, although it would be a win for your health, animal welfare, and the planet's health. Your challenge for the next few weeks is to pay attention to when you're eating cheese. Keep a tally and keep working on your Create a Plate. We talked about Create a Plate in the Starting and Sticking with Your Diet and How to Lose Weight Part 1 videos. As you crowd out dairy cheese, you may try vegan cheeses. They are tasty, delicious, and are a great treat, but keep them as a small treat. Don't pile a whole bag of vegan cheese on your pizza. The reason is that some plant fats like coconut oil and palm oil have a lot of saturated fat. So read the ingredients label and check how much saturated fat you might be eating. I add a layer of spinach on my pizza where the cheese would have been, and I don't even miss the cheese anymore. It took me several months to get over my cheese cravings, and we're all different, so be patient and remember to take it one day at a time until it's 7 days a week, Forever 10.